Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different to our usual pregnancy, birth and parenting stories. In this episode today, I am chatting with Brittany, who will be taking us through her freebirth in the next 2 coming weeks. The only reason why Brittany is going to be on the podcast for so long is because we dived really deep into her 3 pregnancies and 3 births, and we went into a lot of detail. The 2 episodes that will be coming out will probably be birth 1 and 2 together, and then her 3rd birth, which is quite an incredible one, and you're not going to want to miss that one. So in order to keep the episodes to a reasonable length, and also because the conversation we had in this episode was to me really important, I really wanted to highlight it and therefore make it its own episode. In this conversation, Brittany takes us through and compares going through the hospital system with going to school. And for her, she sees it as the way that we are taught nowadays in the schooling system is basically relying on a person to teach us and not really letting us think for ourselves or letting us really believe in our capabilities and knowledge. And therefore, the parallel that she's making is that maybe somewhere along the line we've lost our confidence in our body and in our ability to birth, and therefore the way we are thinking about pregnancy and birth is quite similar to schooling, in that for a lot of women, they go through the hospital system expecting to be cared for on a one-on-one level and for the hospital to have their best interests at heart, which may not always be the case, because we know that the hospital system is not always able to cater for a personalized approach to birth. And as we spoke about in Catherine Bell's episode 2 weeks ago on the podcast in Cuppa with a Pro, women that go through the hospital system are put on a conveyor belt, and it is sometimes a one-size-fits-all approach that is applied to pregnancy and birth. So if what I just said makes sense to you, then you're definitely going to love this conversation with Brittany. If you liked this conversational format on the podcast, please let me know, because this is something I have been thinking of doing on the podcast. Or if you are wanting to come on the podcast and have a chat with me about anything related to society, birth, expectations, vs reality, around birthing in the system, having a home birth, having a free birth, having a breech birth, and so on. If you're into advocacy and any of that, please reach out to me. You can get in touch with me through my socials. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Cuppa with a doula, or you can use the link in the show notes. There is a form that you can fill out, and I will definitely be in touch with you if this is a format that you guys like. So thank you so much for listening. And without further ado, here is our conversation with Brittany. You are listening to Cuppa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mom or mom-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, parenting, and now society. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, relax, and enjoy this episode. Hi, Brittany. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Do you want to start by introducing yourself? So telling the listeners your name, where you're living, and who's in your family.
Yeah, okay. Let's just dive into it. My name is Brittany, and I am a mum of 3 little boys. So I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And we are a cattle station farming family. And we live in Glen Innes in New South Wales, which is pretty much halfway between Brisbane and Sydney. We've only been there for about a year, and previous to that we lived very remotely in the edge of the desert, basically in Cunnamulla in Queensland, so about 12 hours west of Brisbane. We're a cattle station, a farming family, which kind of means the way that we farm requires big blocks of land and lots of cattle, and so those are kind of not in urban areas. The way that we farm is also called regenerative agriculture, which means part of our job as stewards of the land is to regenerate areas that have previously been overgrazed or overfarmed from traditional farming practices. So yeah, we sort of, it's our life's mission to, I guess, heal Australia using cows. Different lifestyle changes that we experience when we live so remote, like where we were living. Although I have to say, I know it kind of sounds probably to your listeners that we're just absolutely, we live in this really alternate universe, but compared to actually quite a few people, we weren't as remote as, you know, a lot of people. You know, we have lived in much more remote places. For example, you get your mail by plane and, you know, there's no mailman, and you kind of get fresh fruit and veggies once a month or once every 2 months. This place where we lived, it was very much on the edge of the desert, and so we were 150 k's from a tiny town that had like a small IGA, and yeah, which kind of I know this is sort of a segue, like we're having a couple with a doula, and you think, what's this got to do with anything? But it actually kind of has quite a bit to do, yeah, with kind of our lifestyle and then our birthing choices. And so that's kind of why this context is really relevant, because it played a lot into, I guess, you know, our final choices with birth.
No, it comes into play. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you know, Cuppa of a doula is all about, it's about parenting. It's not just about pregnancy. It's not just about birth. It's about the parenting journey. And your journey is so interesting in that, you know, living on a station, you don't have access to things like, I don't know, going to the local library for rhyme time and all of that. You don't have access to that. You don't, you know, your boys wouldn't have the same upbringing if they lived in Brisbane compared to, you know, living in Glen Innes. And it's very interesting. And, you know, I'd love to chat about also homeschooling that I believe you're doing, which is very interesting because it makes sense for your family, for you to be homeschooling your boys, you know, to give them a different perspective on what, you know, schooling education is, and give them a different perspective of life, I guess.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I guess drove our decision to homeschool, which is also tied into our birth choices and our parenting choices and things like that, is the fact that we work so hard to create this kind of oasis that we live. We live in like these beautiful natural environments, and then it seems so strange to then put our kids on a bus and send them away from their natural environment that we work so hard to kind of cultivate. And it's like one of the natural wonders of the world that we lived in. And you think, well, like, why are we leaving it every day when actually so many people like are desperate to come and experience that way of life? You know, so many people would be like, oh, you're so lucky, this must be so beautiful. Like, yeah, it actually is. So why would I be sending my kids away from it every day, only for them to like get on a bus and go on an excursion to go and visit a farm? And I'm like, but that's where they live. So I don't really want to kind of separate them from that and like make that kind of, I guess, schism. And one of the things that I heard recently was like, you can't expect somebody to love something that they have never experienced, and you can't expect someone to take care of something that they've never loved. And so if I want my children to be great stewards of our earth that we live on, they have to first love it. And if they're leaving it every day and they're kind of seeing it as something that's just like a bus stop that they sort of sleep at and then leave again, they're not going to be fully immersed into their environment, and they're not probably going to be good stewards of the earth. No, regardless, I'm not saying they have to be farmers, but we all live on this earth, and so we'll have a responsibility to kind of respect it and treat it well.
Of course. And there's a lot of lessons that you learn when you live obviously in a remote location, whether it's extremely remote, or it's just, out of a major town, let's say. And then, seeing you and your husband, cultivating this earth and being farmers and doing your everyday tasks is teaching them a lot.
Yes.
They, as you said, they may not grow up to want to be farmers. So be it, it doesn't matter. But the lessons they're learning from you guys, from you, managing the station, and there is a lot of life skills that they will learn from just air quotes living on the station and watching you guys and being immersed in your everyday tasks.
Yeah, it is. And I feel one of the, I guess, the drivers of homeschooling as well for us is the fact that teaching our boys about being stewards of the land kind of teaches them that we're also not, even though we live in like the dominating, disconnected culture, they're not domineers, or they're not kind of controllers of the land. And when somebody doesn't feel like that deep earth connection or that deep connection to place, they do sometimes fall into the category of being a controller or dominator of the land. So that's when, if someone has that kind of fractured connection to country, that because, they got sent away to boarding school, or they spent, hours and hours of their life sitting in front of a screen learning, quote unquote, learning without actually being on country, they can, and not everybody does, but they can experience that, I guess, sever of connection. Like, it's similar to what you see with like parents and children, or the same thing can happen with like people and land. So it's something that we decided that we wanted to kind of change the narrative of for our kids. The actual thought of kind of sending our children away to school, as in that would mean sending them away to boarding school, like away from their family, or putting them in one of the other schooling options for people that live remotely is School of the Air, what used to be called School of the Air, it's now called distance education. But that is very much like screen-based learning. You're sitting in front of the screen and you're doing modules from a teacher virtually. And farming and just living on the land has so many learning opportunities. Like they learn to count because they listen to us count the cows through the gate. And, they learn about science and biodiversity because we're checking our water quality. And, they're looking at the different plant species that are on the ground, and they can name the plant species because we name the plant species. And, that kind of thing is like, you can't get that any other way.
No, that's right. There's so many things that, homeschooling teaches a child that a school will never be able to teach, because you can't learn life experiences from a textbook and from sitting in front of a teacher telling you their knowledge, And I mean, school is great. Homeschooling is great. Distance education is great. It's all about finding what works for you. And as you said, for you, your boys are 6 and 4. Sending them to boarding school, that is a big decision as a family. And obviously for your boys, as you said, that will impact, their upbringing, obviously being separated from their parents for the sake of education. It is a very big decision. And we know that homeschooling is now, I don't like to say it's on the uprise, but we know that we as a society have been rethinking the way we educate the next generation, and also what is the best way for the next generation to learn what they need to learn. Because we know that, schools have done a good job. I mean, I went to school. I didn't turn out too bad, apparently. But, is it the only way to educate children? Is there maybe a different way that also incorporates a bit more of life skills, things that I never learned when I went to school, things like that you can never learn from a textbook, or that you're not taught because it's not in the curriculum, things like that, things like taxes. You never learn about doing your taxes, right?
Oh, never. No, I had to figure that all out later.
You need to.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not saying your boys need to learn to do taxes, but at least, like learning, seeing you managing a station, I'm sure there is an admin side to it, and they would see you do that admin side. they could be interested and go, oh, mom, what are you doing? Oh, okay, you're doing this, you're doing the, inventory,
Mhm.
whatever you're
Mhm.
doing. And then they learn how to use Excel and
Yeah.
Word and how to, whatever you're doing, they would learn that. Whereas at school, it's not in the curriculum, so you don't learn it.
Yeah, and I feel
Shame.
like that actually, if you want to take it one layer deeper to that, is school and I guess our modern culture kind of teaches us a lack of self trust. Because we're always outsourcing our knowledge to somebody else. So we're always
Yeah.
saying like I don't know because the teacher is teaching me, so the teacher knows. And so we often then it sort of fractures that relationship between self and inner self, and then we
Yeah.
don't actually realize that we have everything that we need to learn already inside of us, and we already
Yeah.
have a beautiful brain that is capable of learning. And so like my children are kind of already, even at such a young age, they're already super responsible for what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. And I had to do a lot of de-schooling for myself to actually rebuild that self-trust, that I actually do have trust within myself that I can provide the space and time and place for them to learn. And I had to be like, oh, I can homeschool my children, even though I spent 13 years of my schooling being schooled. And so you actually have to rebuild that self-trust and then learn not to destroy it in your own children by kind of taking on the teacher head, and then they just start deferring to you. And this is also related to birth, because within birth we as women we've spent 13 years being schooled of how to defer to an authority or somebody bigger or more experienced than us has the answers. And then so often we graduate from school and then we go through university, which same kind of thing, or we go into a job and then we fall pregnant, and then the first thing we do is seek out an authority, because that's kind of how we've spent 13 years of our schooling. And then we just follow that same pattern, and we don't actually look inwards and have any self-trust at all. And so you kind of think, how's schooling related to like birth? But here we are, you actually realize that it's all intrinsically linked.
Definitely is. Yep. No, that's right. It definitely is. And as you said, it's very interesting the way you've just worded it, because I couldn't have worded it that way, even though now that I think about it, it makes sense. That's right. You get pregnant, you go and see your GP, and then from there on, you're seeking their, as you said, their authority, but also their guidance to then get you to potentially the best place for you to birth. And then you rely on then, that next place's, authority to then guide you and somewhat tell you what to do, what your options are, what you can and can't do. And I think it's important to change the narrative and to say, if that's what you want, go for it. But it doesn't have to be that you get told what to do, where to birth, what you can and can't do. You can actually play a major role, and instead of having someone tell you, you can say, this is what I want. And then sometimes you have to bargain with, mostly the hospital system. And other times it can be more of a, yes, we can, until maybe some red flags arises, which makes sense. You've still got to be conscious about your health, your baby's health. Makes sense.
Yes, exactly. And that's probably a really great segue into kind of my journey into birth, because I feel like I'm super unique in the fact that I've gone from my first birth being extremely medicalized. I had an obstetrician, which in most people's circles, that's like even more medicalized than just going through the public health system. And so I went from one extreme all the way to the other extreme by my third birth.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's very indicative of my journey personally through all of that, like learning about self-trust and, all of that kind of thing. That's, I look at it and I'm like, wow, I'm like the poster child for, it only took me 3 births to get there, but I'm like the poster child for like starting off in one way and ending up in completely the other direction.
Yeah, but I think, as you said, there's, and I feel like this is a common do this, you need to have the fetal scalp monitor, and then you kind of sometimes look back and you go, I could have said no, but you didn't know you could say no, right? Like you just don't know what you don't know. And it's hard sometimes to take that stance when you're a first-time mom, because you go, well, I've never birthed. This is my first pregnancy. This person has gone to school. They've studied. They know more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's your body. And that's hard to trust sometimes, especially when it's your first. It's hard to trust your instinct, what your gut's telling you, your sensation. It's hard to trust that, because you go, well, they know better than me. I don't know. But no, you're the boss, and whatever you feel is true. It is what's happening, and you can have a voice, and you don't have to say no, but you can say, what about if I don't want this? Can I do something else? Or can I have something else instead? Or what happens if I don't do this? And you can just, I guess question is the right term. You can question their knowledge in a respectful manner, and just say, what other options do I have instead of doing an induction, for example?
Yes. And I feel it's crazy, because it's actually kind of a moot point to say, and I know like we hear it everywhere, you've got rights and you've got options and you've got to speak up and you've got to advocate for yourself. I actually kind of don't agree with that on like a surface level, because let's just say, for example, I took you to a restaurant and I said, I'm going to give you this really interesting dish and it's delicious and I've made it myself. You've actually never eaten any of the ingredients that is in this dish, but I'm telling you it's really healthy and you'll really, really, really love it. Like, seriously, you can tell me that you don't want anything that's in that dish. There's like zucchini in the dish, and there's mince in the dish, and there's some pasta in the dish and stuff like that. You, at any time, you can say that you don't want it, but you've never had it before, so you don't know that it's going to be the most delicious thing you've ever had in your life. But you can speak up at any time and say that you don't want it until you're actually starting to eat it, and then it's kind of too late. And you're like, okay, all right, well, I can speak up and say that I don't want anything that's in that dish, except I don't know, A, what it's going to taste like, B, what the best kind of outcome for me with this dish is. Is it going to be like, do I want it to be sweet? Do I want it to be savory? Do I don't actually have any say, and I've kind of never had it before, so I don't know. And then it's only until after you've finished the dish and you're like, wow, that was really disgusting. And I know I could have spoken up at any time before that dish was going to be served to me, but it was a mystery dish. So I didn't actually know that I wasn't going to like it until after I'd eaten it. And I was like, this is disgusting. And then to feel shame about going, oh, man, I should have spoken up and said I don't like zucchini. Yeah. But they assured me that I've never had it before, so I wouldn't know what it would taste like. Like, that is actually just the most ridiculous thing if you think about it, to kind of say right at the end. And then, of course, at the end, you're going to be like, oh, I didn't like zucchini. Why didn't I speak up and say I don't like zucchini? But it's ridiculous. And I think about it now, and I was like, I had no frame of reference coming into birth to say I want this or I don't want that. It would be like saying, no, I didn't want you to put ice cream on my dish, but you never told me I was going to put ice cream on the dish. So, of course, I couldn't have spoken up and said I didn't want ice cream, because that would be ridiculous that you would put ice cream with zucchini. But, like, that's how I kind of say. And it's really, really difficult to speak to somebody who's never experienced birth before. To kind of say, oh, you've got rights and you can speak up. What are they speaking up for? They don't even know what they're advocating for, because they've never gone through it. Yeah,
that's right. And that's a huge topic these days, honestly. That was a great analogy. Loved your mystery dish, by the way.
It's what it feels like. It's like, okay, I'm going to advocate for something that I don't even know what I'm getting, but okay.
No, that's right. And when I've been talking to, a few women who, they're first-time moms, and then we talk about, I love asking about birth education, right? Did you do any form of birth education? And they say, oh, yes, I've done the hospital birthing classes, because obviously when you birth through a hospital, your hospital usually offers classes, so you go through those. And nowadays, and especially when you've got the insight that you now have because you've given birth, those women, they go, the hospital told me what they wanted me to know.
Yeah, 100%.
Really. So yes, they kind of sprinkle a bit of, advocacy and you've got rights, but then when it actually comes to it, I don't want to bag every single health professional that works in a public hospital, because that's not the case. But sometimes there are some pushy health professionals out there who only want the outcome that they want, and they will not stop until they get the outcome they want, regardless of what the woman wants. And in those cases, yes, you can be informed, you can advocate, you can have, your doula, your birth partner, your so on. It's super hard to say no, to say back off, to say that's not what I want, that's not my birth preferences, when it's your first, when you're being told, no, but you need to, it's policy. If you don't know, and you're in labor as well, like add that to the mix as well, you're in labor, you've got other things to do then to say, no, can you not push me? Can you not pressure me? Can you just back off?
And also,
how sorry, I just want to finish and just say one thing that that people don't understand as well, and again, you don't know what you don't know, but when someone says, it's policy in the hospital, policy isn't law. Policy doesn't mean if you disrespect it, you're going to be arrested and you're going to be put in jail. Policy means they have guidelines because they have to, but it doesn't mean that it's a law and you have to do it by the book. So when they say, it's policy, you can say, okay, cool. I still can say no to it. I can still, you can sign anything that says, against medical advice, I wish to not blah, blah, blah. They've got forms of all sorts for that. And you can therefore decline anything, because it is you making the decision at the end of the day. It's not them. They can't decide for you or for your baby what is best.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head there. And I think one of the unfortunate things about many women's experiences in birth is that, exactly like you've said, policy isn't law. However, we shouldn't have to be navigating a battlefield in such a vulnerable time as labour. And I had a conversation with somebody recently about going into hospital to give birth, and I kind of said, you need to kind of, you can stand up for yourself, and like I literally use your words, which was, policy isn't law. They can't make you do, the induction or whatever. And I said, you shouldn't be having to advocate yourself in the portal of labour. Like, that's not the time when you need to be advocating for yourself. No. And they said, oh yeah, but isn't that what your husband is for? Like, or your partner? Can't they advocate for you? And I was like, that is just, that just blows my mind that you think that your husband's job in this life-changing, most sacred ceremony of birth is to stand up for your rights, which he actually really, if let's be honest, he doesn't really know, because he can't be in your body and decide whether that feels good for you or not good for you. He kind of only knows it on a surface level, like, she wants candles or no, or she wants, essential oils burning or no, and they see someone taking the essential oil burner away and they'll be like, hey, that's probably that's like literally the equivalent of their kind of advocacy. But can we just take it one step further and be like, that's not the dad's job. That's not what he should be doing when he is witnessing and kind of being, I guess, in awe of his woman in this primal, most beautiful experience. He doesn't want to have to be navigating whether you got candles or bloody essential oil burners, or wait, no, she said she didn't want an epidural. That's not, he shouldn't have to be doing that. No one should have to be doing that in this time. No one should even be speaking words in this time. That is like, you can derail a birth with a wrong look or a wrong sentence or an ill-placed, an ill-timed conversation. You can derail a birth completely, because it's not a time to be going into battle. It is a time to be going into ceremony, not a time to be going into battle. But however, it feels like battle for many people that are like, I can advocate for myself. I need to advocate for myself. the last thing on your mind when you are going into the realms of birth is words like policy and advocacy and, rights.
Yeah.
You can't even think about those and if you are thinking about those things, you're in your you're in your logic brain, and you need to get out of your logic brain, because being in your logic brain during birth is dangerous.
Yeah, and the problem is, and this is something I talk about a lot on this podcast, is the medical system is good and it's got a place in society, and we know that, but sometimes it's not the best option.
No.
It's not the best option for every single birth. It depends on, individual circumstances. Of course, it depends on what you want, medical conditions, things like that, high-risk pregnancies, all of that, yes. But also, it's not, the alternative option to birthing in a public hospital is either to free birth, which you need confidence, you need support to do it, or it's to have a private midwife, which comes at a cost. So the problem we have in today's society is we just don't have an alternative for women who, have a low-risk pregnancy, who just want to give birth in a place that they feel safe in, but without being, told about policy, without, being told that they need to be checked for dilation, or they need to have a CTG on, or they need to agree to, the cord being clamped straight after birth, that they just want to birth, be within, and then have the baby and just be left alone. You know what I mean? And that is not an option in a lot of public hospitals, unfortunately. And the only way to have that is to free birth or have a private midwife, which both have different, implications.
Definitely.
And again, not accessible to everyone either.
And the issue that you brought up then is, I just want to give birth in a place where you feel safe. That is actually kind of fraught with many layers of complexity, because in your logic brain, you've had 13 years plus of colonization of your brain that tells you you are safe, you are worthy, you are approved of within an institution. So in your logic brain, of course, when you're going into quote unquote a medical event like birth, which I don't believe birth is a medical event, but however, of course, in our culture it is. So in your brain, you've had all of this time in school to tell you that, important and vulnerable and like all of these kind of, I guess, rites of passage happen in an institution. So, of course, you want to be in an institution to give birth, because that's, quote unquote, where your logic brain feels safe. Yeah. So I've had so many women tell me, but I just feel safe giving birth in a hospital. Yeah, actually, that's very true on a surface level, because of your conditioning that tells you the safest place to be. When you have a car accident and you're feeling scared because your leg's falling off, of course, the place where you feel safe is in hospital. You don't feel safe on the side of the road. But people kind of make the same condition, like they draw the same conclusions with birth, because they see birth as a medical event. So of course, when you're having a medical event, you feel safe in a hospital. I'm just gonna like peel that back and say, I acknowledge that your logic brain does feel safe in a hospital. So of course, logically, you would be like, I'm going to be the most relaxed I can be in a hospital. Yes. However, you are ignoring your mammalian brain that you don't have control over. However, it controls your birth. You are ignoring the mammalian brain that does not feel safe away from home. And you don't know that. You don't know that your mammalian brain feels vulnerable and scared with fluoro lights. You don't know that your mammalian brain can't function when there's strange smells of antiseptic and people that they don't know. You don't know any of those things, and yet you are putting your mammalian brain that you're expecting to do a really great job and, be at its absolute best and most functional, you are putting your mammalian brain into a place where it cannot function. So birth is a mammalian process, or like a primal process, and you're trying to put your logic head into a primal experience. And that's where a lot of women fall into the trap of being like, oh yeah, but I feel safe in hospital.
Yeah.
And then their logic brain leaves the room, of course, in birth, like it always happens, and then mammalian brain takes over, and then mammalian brain says, I'm not safe here. I'm going to stop.
No, that's right. And it's, you know, as you said, it's, I don't know who's to blame here. We're not trying to find who to blame, but it's, you know, there is a lot of societal expectation and societal, you know, like rules almost that, you know, tell you that the safest place to birth, the safest place when anything happens to your health is the hospital, or it's the medical system, which, you know, it, as you said, you know, it usually is. Again, is birth a medical event? We could argue about that, you know, all year round, right? It depends, you know, it depends. Some women, you know, they highly need the medical system to fall pregnant, to birth. Yes. Is that the case for most women? I don't think so. But again, it comes down to if a woman is a first-time mom and then they're being told, oh, you shouldn't go to a hospital because you're having a low-risk pregnancy, and you basically, you don't even see your midwife that often. They see you, you know, once a month, once every 6 weeks. So you're pretty much fine, you know, in between those appointments. Well, why do you need to birth there? You know, like maybe you could birth at home. And if you say that to a, you know, first-time mom, they'd probably go, no, I can't birth at home. I'd be too scared. And so therefore they wouldn't be able to birth at home because they just just can't do it, right? So
no.
It's a hard one, isn't it?
And I have to say, like, it took me until my third birth to get to that point.
Yep.
So it is very difficult to talk to a first-time mum to advocate for something that they don't know that it exists.
Yes.
And however, I have a couple of beautiful friends of mine who are the most amazing people ever, who have free birthed their first babies, and I think they are the biggest warriors of the universe, and I'm so inspired by them.
Yeah.
However, for me, my first birth, there was no way that I could ever have done that. I had to go through the layers of deconditioning to get to that point.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're saying is, you know, I don't like to say it's the norm because I don't like to talk about the norm, but I think it is a common dialogue amongst first-time moms. It's, I don't think I can do it until I've had at least one birth and I've seen how, you know, what happened, how was my experience, how did I feel, you know, and until your instincts kick in labor, or, you know, in the, you know, first stages of your early labor or so on, until then you, I guess, don't trust yourself maybe fully to do it.
How can you?
And
You've
then,
never done it.
And I think that's what it is, you know. And then you've got women like, you know, your friends who have just gone on to free birth their first child and you know, probably haven't looked back, you know, just like some women decide to home birth their first child, and for them that's super normal, but yet they're considered to be, you know, marginalized. They're considered to be a small percentage of society. Definitely.
Yes, for sure.
And this concludes this episode with Brittany. I hope you enjoyed it. Because we chatted a lot about society and the system and so on, I really wanted this part to be a separate episode to Brittany's 3 births, so that one, the episodes were a bit shorter, and also because I didn't want this part to be missed. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you like this format, let me know, because this is something I've been thinking about doing on the podcast. And therefore, if you are wanting to come on the podcast to have conversations about, you know, the hospital system or home birth or free birthing or something like that, and you want to have an open chat like we did with Brittany, then definitely message me, whether it's on socials, you know, on Facebook, Instagram at Cuppa with a doula, or you can email me, or you can use the form in the show notes below, and that's got my phone number and my email if you want to get in touch. I'd definitely love to have